Thank you, Jace, and welcome everyone to our final panel discussion this morning. As Jace has highlighted, this session will cover data and the ability to measure change. Many of you will already know me as the Chief Operating Officer at New West End Company, but what you might not know about me is my background as a qualified accountant. I only say that because robust numbers and consistent data have always been a real interest of mine. What we measure and how we get smarter at doing it isn't without its challenges, particularly in the sustainability space. But the value of doing this together and guiding our strategic decision making is what we are here to discuss today. So if I can introduce our panellists. Firstly, on my right, we have Judith Everett, Executive Director of Purpose, Sustainability and Stakeholder at the Crown Estate. Next is Muzzy Jorgensen, Chief Sustainability Officer with Microsoft. Next, we have Johanna Sutton, Climate Change Lead with the GLA. And last but by no means least, Ronan Layden, who is Consultancy Director for Bioregional. So we're going to aim to make this a really dynamic session, hopefully lots of questions, but I will kick off with opening questions for each of our panellists. So Judith, how important is it for companies to ensure that their wider business objectives really ensure that they include sustainability initiatives? And should we go one step further and say that successful businesses should rely on sustainability initiatives to lead the way?
Morning, Dee, and thanks for being here, everybody. It's fantastic to be at this conference and great to have had the range of panels. We've had everything from consumer interest through to what we need to do in the built environment and now how we measure our progress. I spent all of yesterday afternoon with our CFO and our sustainability committee looking at our own targets, because how we set our targets for what we do over the next 12, 18, 24 months has to include the sustainability element of what we're setting out to do. And having signed up to science-based targets, and I think it was the last panel talking about if you're signed up to 2030, that is 8 years of time left to actually meet what is a very, very challenging target if you're in the built environment. So I think that's a very, very real subject for us and being taken very seriously at board level. So on our sustainability committee, we have our chair, our SID, who's Karen Jones, involved with the food and beverage business, and also Juliet Davenport, who until recently was the co-founder of Good Energy. So some really heavyweights challenging us as an executive in terms of what we're doing. So we see it as how we run the business, not necessarily sustainability separated out. And I think it's really important there's rigor. It's really important that those numbers are as common currency as the finance numbers that we look at in any company, so that they make sense and we know that we can track our progress and see ourselves really, really making impact. It's fair to say that at the moment the impact is very much focused around net zero and around the financial metrics, because that's where we've got common currency. But I think we need to find other ways, other areas that we can get consistent metrics on without getting obsessed about it and driving the wrong behaviours. But I think it's really, really important, and I don't see it as separate. I see it as being fundamental to how we do business. Our strategy is based around a purpose that we created, we restated a couple of years ago. Our strategy flows from that. The way we make capital allocation decisions is all tied into the strategy, and it all comes back to being a more sustainable business and creating value creating prosperity, in our case for the nation. So it's very much part of our DNA, as opposed to being a sustainability initiative run by the sustainability professionals, although they're very vital to it.
I think it's something we've learned as a business. You don't have a sustainability team that sits over here. It's within all of us, and we must learn to live slightly differently, perhaps we have in the past.
Yeah, but as we heard from the last panel, there's some really deep professional knowledge that needs to inform how we make progress on this. So it's down to all of us, but we need to draw on the professionals to help make it happen, but in a very integrated way.
For sure. And then Muzzy, how can technology companies such as Microsoft support companies in their sustainability goals? And how can we use that knowledge so that we share for districts and places as well as businesses as individuals?
Yeah. So look, thank you first of all for having me and for having Microsoft here. We're incredibly proud to be part of the community and to be having this really important discussion here today. Look, we all know that the statistics are stark, and for those of us who have read the most recent IPCC report, we don't have a lot of time to get this right. And we need to ensure that we are measuring the right things and focusing in the right area, and we're not wasting time, because we don't have time to waste if we don't get this right. And so I think, Microsoft, we've been on our own journey. We've learned a huge amount, over the past several years, where we've been really focused on this and are trying to help our customers with their journey as well, across what they're doing for their sustainability objectives. And being a technology company, I think we're really well placed to help and support that. Now, we know there's no one silver bullet to fix all of the world's problems, but actually, I think technology is a really brilliant enabler to accelerate some of the answers that we need to be finding, particularly when we look at data. And as Judith said, we've got an abundance of data, but focusing into the right area, I think, is really important. So, being a data company and technology company, we're really well placed to help our customers look at that. So we work with, all of the industries, particularly some great examples around working with financial services companies to think about where they need to be putting their investments for their sort of ESG initiatives, and ensuring that the outcomes of those really have proper sustainable impact in the community. Working with manufacturing organisations by helping them think about their supply chain, by looking at things like digital twins and how they can be more efficient with the sort of new ways of working. As you said, we need to be thinking about new ways of doing things. Working with retailers about how they can embrace the circular economy and look at ensuring that from design to actually getting the product out is really sustainable. But all of that is stemmed in ensuring then that that the data that we can see and help with our customers is providing the outcomes and the impacts and measuring in the right way. So we're really focused on that with our customers, and part of my role as the UK Chief Sustainability Officer to ensure that we bring all of that learning that we've done, and still, as I say, on our learning journey. I think the second part of your question, how do we ensure that we're doing this together? None of us have got these answers in isolation. So I think the key to it is coming together, is collaborating, is sharing this, but working on a standardised way of ensuring that we are measuring the carbon emissions and things, and ensuring that we're sharing that knowledge together and driving those outcomes in the right way, and not just all focusing in different areas. So I think key to this is around collaborating and sharing of knowledge and those outcomes that we've all been measuring.
For sure. I think your first point was very interesting around data. We have got a lot of data.
Yeah.
So it's understanding the right things to measure and how we do that in a standardised form, perhaps,
Yes.
Will be the way forward. Johanna, in terms of the GLA, what's its role in terms of collating, analysing and potentially publishing data that can be used to support London's sustainability initiatives? And perhaps you could share some of the GLA's initiatives that West End businesses that are in the room might be able to get involved with.
Absolutely. So thank you for having us today. It's great to be here, and great. The first few panels have been really interesting. So in terms of collecting data, so the GLA produces a London-wide inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is the London Energy and Greenhouse Gas Inventory, which is called LEGI. We publish this annually, and it includes our energy consumption, so kilowatt hours, and then our emissions in tonnes of carbon. So this is broken down by borough and by sector. So we look at buildings, domestic, industrial, transport waste, industrial processes and product use, and as well as agriculture, forestry and other land uses. So we do focus on Scope 1 emissions, so emissions that occur in London. We look at the emissions that are generated by the grid, so that's Scope 2 emissions, and some of the emissions which are associated with waste disposal, so falling more in Scope 3. And London's emissions are around 31 million tonnes of CO2, so carbon. Separately from LEGI, we also collect data on London's consumption-based emission. So this is the emissions associated with everything Londoners spend money on. So that includes food, electronics, holidays, and what our taxes contribute to. When we look at emissions this way, we're closer to around 94 million tonnes of carbon. So we publish this data to provide the GLA, boroughs, other stakeholders, including businesses, ways to have a comprehensive understanding of London's emissions, where they come from, and what we need to focus our actions on. So this informs the way we design and develop our policies and programmes, and hopefully influences the way others design theirs. So, for example, the data that we have published and verified now for 2018 shows that emissions from industrial and commercial buildings were around 10 million tonnes of carbon. So that's about a third of London's emissions. And we know that national regulations don't go far enough in regulating building energy efficiency. The mayor doesn't have regulatory power here. So one of the areas that we're working with businesses is on energy efficiency in buildings. We run a program called the Mayor's Business Climate Challenge, which was run in pilot through 2021 and 2022, which provided bespoke support to businesses to reduce their energy consumption. It looked at the light touch actions that they could take through to deeper retrofit measures and looked at the blockers there. So it was real bespoke one-to-one support, because something we've heard from businesses is that every building is different. We heard in the previous panel that every relationship with a landlord or a building owner is different, or a building manager. And it really is getting in individually and figuring out what to do there, taking the data from that and helping that to inform us further. That program will be running again. We'll be reaching out to more businesses. I'd say that's a really great way for West End businesses to get involved in this. Something else that we've done with Leggy, so that inventory that I mentioned, is that we've used it to look at how we achieve London's net zero by 2030 target. So we worked with the consultants Element Energy to look at the different scenarios which could take London to this target. And earlier in 2022, the Mayor's announced his preferred pathway. So by looking at this, it's a similar process to the way a business would set a net zero target. We've looked at our baseline emissions. We've set that target and looked at how we can get there. So I think some of the metrics that looking at doing this analysis has brought forward is that we need a 39% reduction in heat demand from non-domestic buildings through to 2030. So sticking with the non-domestic building theme here, that's about 26,500 deep retrofits per year through to 2030. We need 2.2 million heat pumps in London's buildings. We need 460,000 buildings connected to district heating networks, 1.5 gigawatts of solar installed on London's roofs. So while working with the data hasn't, we've not been modelling particular policies, we have understood what actions are required to achieve this target, and that's informed what we're doing. And we know that retrofit programs, financial incentives, fiscal incentives, but also lobbying government for stronger policies. We've heard from businesses that skills in these areas are needed, that the workforce and that the skills are not currently available to enable us to move at the pace that we need to. So essentially all of our work with data, aggregating this and analysing it has informed our policies, the way we work with boroughs and the way we work with organisations like NWEC and businesses.
Some of those stats you mentioned seem like a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Is there a clear pathway? Is there, are the wheels in motion, should we say? Yes.
So I think there's one of the biggest things that we need is a reduction in kilometres travelled by cars. So from 2018 numbers, we need a 27% reduction in kilometres travelled. And I don't think the ultra-low emission zone has escaped anyone's notice. So that's one of the policies that we've put in place to really drive down emissions. For all of those other really big numbers that I mentioned, yes, there are policies in place at the London level, and we are working with boroughs, with London councils, with businesses through initiatives such as the Green New Deal as part of the COVID recovery to begin to drive these. But it's going to be a whole of system change that is required, and some of those things, for example, the heat pumps are completely dependent on national government increasing the funding available, increasing the skills available, and really communicating with building owners, whether it's domestic or commercial buildings, how and why to do this. And it's that really fiddly one-to-one communication and offering the support for a specific building. Again, if we stick with the buildings example, that means it will take time. But yes, a lot of the wheels are in motion.
That's fantastic, thank you. And then Ronan, over to you. In terms of Bioregional, how will you use the One Planet Living framework and the 10 core principles to measure New West End companies' success over the next 5 to maybe 10 years?
Yeah, thanks very much. And we're very excited to be part of this journey with NWEC. And I think this conference is an example of the kind of impact and collaboration that NWEC can do uniquely. So I think there's sort of three ways in which the use of One Planet Living will influence and affect the way measurement goes about and the route to net zero carbon. So I think the first way is it's about being comprehensive and holistic. So for those not familiar with the One Planet Living framework, it covers socio-economic principles such as culture and community, health and happiness, local economy and equity. It covers the environmental principles, water, land use, food, and the technical sustainability principles of waste, energy, carbon. So it's a really comprehensive approach to sustainability, and that produces a whole range of KPIs and targets across quite a wide area to cover. And so we've got to take quantitative approaches where that's appropriate and gather the right data. And we've also got to be open to qualitative approaches where we need more human-centric and feedback approaches. And we need to combine those two together to get the right intelligence and the right understanding. I think that the cultural approach, if you like, for One Planet Living is very much around a human-centric approach. So it's very much around focusing on the outcomes we want to achieve first and letting the data serve us in achieving those outcomes and not being led the other way around. I think the second part really is it's about being robust and consistent. So very much in terms of the net zero carbon commitment, it's about being compliant with the Science Based Targets Initiative definitions. It's about covering scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions and being appropriate in the way in which we scope out those emissions. So seeing a commitment to not only achieving net zero by 2040, but interim targets on scope 1 and 2. And I think that the final thing is, and it's come up quite a bit, is it's about being collaborative and working in partnership. It's a recurring theme across all the speakers today has been the fact that no one entity can do this alone. We've been really impressed by the way we've been able to collaborate with NWEC. You haven't expected us just to come along and set some targets and disappear. This is a long-term relationship. This is about being a critical friend. This is about helping not only to push performance forward, but also understand the challenges, work with stakeholders, and get everybody sharing data across collaborative platforms. And I think that's the only way we can really achieve what we're going to try and achieve here. Otherwise, we're all working in silo. So I think there's been a kind of, I think up until now, there's been a very strong emphasis by individual players, and I think we've seen entities taking great leadership, and I think we're now at the level of maturity and the level of urgency where we need to see that cross-platform collaboration, and partners like Microsoft and other data experts are essential for helping us to collect and collaborate that data to get the outcomes we need. And just to finish off, I think the One Planet Living approach is very much around human-centric, as I said. So it's about thinking, what are the outcomes we want to achieve first, and making sure that the data follows the outcomes and not the other way around.
Thank you. One more question, if I may. With a need to kind of report on everything that we're doing, how do we ensure that we measure and report the things that are truly important and that are really making a difference, and we don't get lost in the weeds of some of the detail? We've got limited resource. So how do we keep that focus as a district?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that goes back to the collaboration part. So in working through the One Planet Living framework, we used all 10 principles. We looked across a whole range of issues and we set a very comprehensive action plan. But it was very important to do the next stage, and that's to engage with partners and to work out where the key priorities are. And so that's where we've got those 3 core pillars. And so very much focusing on net zero carbon. We've got a climate emergency that has to be top of the list. But also I think a really important pillar is creating a sustainable retail experience and a leisure experience, because this is about humans and choices in the end of the day. There's lots of technical data out there, but we've got to convince our humans to make different decisions and behave in different ways. So it's about that qualitative approach to creating the experience that reinforces a culture of sustainability. And then obviously the final one, air quality. That's a huge issue. It's a big challenge, but it's about taking it on, face on, and trying to find a way, and through creating a zero emissions zone within the West End area. That's a sort of very progressive way of achieving that.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to open up the floor to some questions. Just while the mics are winging their way to you, I'm sure there's hands in the air already. I'm going to ask one last cheeky question to get you warmed up to our panellists. We touched on this before, but a new West End company, we are adopting the Science Based Targets Initiative approach, which is in line with climate science in terms of net zero. How important is it for standardisation across the board on what we are all measuring and reporting on? Judith, perhaps I'll start with you.
I think it's really important. I think standardisation is important because otherwise we end up potentially gaming the system and people look at setting targets that don't have that common currency. So I think the measurement is really important, but we can't lose sight of why it is we're doing what we're doing. This isn't a luxury. This isn't something we can opt in or out of. This is about us having lived for decades outside of the system's resources. So I think it's really serious, and we need to be taking steps that make real impact. And I think unless we measure it, it could be easy for some players to just sit back and not measure it and make all sorts of claims. So I think we have to be able to measure consistently and give people a choice about who they do business with, who they work for, who they shop with, who they live with, who they take space from, and just give people sharing the data. So I think your point about working collaboratively, really important. This is not about competitive advantage in meeting the climate emergency. This is about competitive advantage through what we do as individual businesses, but working together to meet the climate emergency.
For sure.
I completely agree, and I think we can't fix what we can't measure, and if we're all, as I said earlier, on different hymn sheets around what we're trying to measure, then we're all going in different directions. So I think absolutely, Microsoft support a standardisation of how we measure this, and very much focused on the carbon call, which is around how we can all sign up to a standardised way of measurement. And completely echo what you said, this is not about competing with each other. I mean, we all have, this is about collaboration and how we can help and support and innovate and unlock the brilliant ideas that are sitting, potentially that haven't been realised yet in people's heads to see how we can go and find some more answers to the problems that we need to seek. But I think at the baseline, it starts with addressing and understanding what those problems are and how we can measure the success of that.
And as we say, we're not in competition. We want to share best practice and innovate and do more and do it together.
Yeah.
Anything, Joanna, from GLA perspective?
I think, it's we definitely feel it's required, but we know that there's such a huge volume of ways to report, whether it's SBTI or the Carbon Disclosure Project. And I think just going for a credible and verified way of doing that, and then, yes, moving towards a standardized form would be beneficial. We do need that shared language and the shared targets, which NWEX Summit kind of brings us around today. There are loads of targets kind of set. London has one, the UK has one, etc. But it is all pushing in the same direction. And I think echoing what you've said already, both, is that if you publish this information or the steps you are taking, your climate action plan and the way that you will get there, smaller businesses or other organisations, I think it's been touched on today, how well known this area is globally, it will have an impact. Others will use this evidence, this knowledge sharing to take to their own businesses to make these changes. So the more we can publish and the more we can be transparent, I think we have a real impact there.
Ronan, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, yes, standardisation is the way. I mean, obviously, there's always a strong debate as to what the standard should be. We advocate Science-Based Targets Initiative. I think we've got to the level of maturity now where, in the last 5 years, we've seen everybody finally committing to the climate emergency, committing to net zero targets, and we've got it in legislation now. And I think now we're at the stage where we need to level off exactly what we mean by that, what's in and out of scope. It does get complicated, it does get technical, and I think there was a mention of we need the right technical advisors to kind of get us there. I think once we have that standardization, that's when technology providers like Microsoft and others can create the platforms to get that data sharing. So CDP at the moment do have supply chain platform for sharing carbon emissions, and so that you can ask your entire supply chain to sign up to that. And so that there are emerging platforms, but I think we need a much more sophisticated technological solutions to that, and I think we need them to be capable. At the moment, there's a big long waiting list to get onto that because it's overwhelmed. So I think we need the players, the technology players, to come forward and help us with those cross-collaboration platforms.
I think you're right, and I think the Science-Based Targets Initiative only launched back end of COP or during COP in October, November. So I think it's fine we need ambition, don't we? And I think it's fine to say we haven't got all the answers right now, but we're absolutely going to get there, and we're going to work together to ensure that we do. by 2030, 2040 or...
Yeah. Can I just add one point? I mean, I think there's a lot of language around this, and I think it's quite confusing. We're doing quite a lot of work internally about how to debunk and simplify some of the language, because there's a whole lot of language that goes with every discipline. But I think what we're talking about is the climate emergency. It's living within a climate temperature rise of 1.5, which the ICC report, PCC report, too many acronyms, made it clear we're not nowhere near. So this is like we're not, and within this time frame we're sort of at 3% or something like that. But for me, this is a hygiene factor for businesses that want to survive now. This is not where we stop. This is, if you're not doing this as a business, if you're not really looking at what you need to do to stay within that 1.5 temperature rise, there's a chance that your products, your services, your assets, whatever, will become obsolete. So, but that's just incredibly important to just start working on. But there are a whole lot of other aspects of sustainability that we can't lose sight of, because biodiversity is incredibly important, and so is the social impact that all businesses make, all players make. So I think it's really important that we all get on the programme with the climate change aspect of it, but let's not forget about biodiversity and social impact, because they are important for the sustainability of this platform and planet, and our living in a more equitable and just society.
Absolutely, for sure. Okay, have we got any microphones already placed?
You mentioned obviously sustainability is very complex, but also the data that sits behind it is quite imperfect at times. How do we communicate and translate that data so people can understand it in a credible way without being susceptible to greenwashing?
I think that's the million-dollar question. That's what we're spending quite a lot of time thinking. I suspect all of us on this platform are trying to spend time thinking about. And when you open your mouth on a platform like this, or even in a meeting internally or with a whole cross-section of colleagues, you think, I must keep this as simple as I can, but quite quickly you drift into language, which, to your point, is very difficult to follow. So I think it's really important that we get it right. There's a programme of doing what we need to do, so we are genuinely meeting the commitments we're all making and filling the gaps that we need to close. And then there's an imperative on just making the language as simple as possible and as compelling as possible, because it is about engaging fellow human beings to be part of this, as opposed to it being the domain of experts or somehow lectury or moralistic. I think it's really about getting people excited about what we can all do. But yeah, I think it's quite a long journey for us still. I don't know if anybody else.
I would agree. Look, I think to define what success looks like for all of us, as you've said, it's, we've got the macro bit, but it's bringing it down then to the micro piece for, as you said, on the behaviour change, how we can then help people to do the things that we need them to do on this huge transformation that we're all going to be going through. The biggest one that we're going to know about in modern history. I think it's important, I back up your piece around the language, that everybody can understand what their bit of the success looks like, and that we just change how we're operating as businesses to drive that. So it's not an easy question. I don't think there's an easy silver bullet answer to that one.
No, I agree. I think it's greenwashing in particular is something that, with the proliferation of businesses understanding that people are looking for products and services that achieve these values, it's unavoidable that the language isn't always super precise. We're asked quite often, particularly in terms of financial services, what are we doing to avoid this kind of green wave being quite hollow or not achieving what we want it to. And it's something that we need to work with business on as the GLA, or we need to understand what is being done, and data and sort of presenting and sharing this is a big part of that. So all of the tools that I mentioned today are available on the London Data Store, including our pathway to net zero by 2030 and the different options. So the pathway that we did not choose because they weren't feasible, the greenhouse gas inventory, our solar building stock model, all of these are available and shared to kind of begin to help here. But I think, yes, the more that businesses can also publish this data and we can work together to set that shared language and what certain terms mean and what cannot be called green is very important, but it's a long journey.
Yeah, I would reinforce what you're saying. I think that if there was a simple answer, it's probably transparency. So I think it's about having simple, non-technical summaries to engage people, to get hearts and minds, and then it's about having technical appendices and open data source as much as possible. We have got data protection laws, and we need to respect those, but wherever possible, it's about providing data tables and methodological statements to back up the science behind any statements made. I think we just need to be careful that there has been a culture in the past of people, almost organisations and entities, fearing making any kind of public commitment for fear of being caught out but not thoroughly investigating. I think there's a level of expertise now that can support organisations to make the right choices and come out, but I also think the scale of the urgency is such that we just have to make those commitments now, and we just have to find a way to achieve them. And we might not know the answer at the beginning, but we'll work together to find that way.
The methodology behind any calculation is music to my ears, obviously. Any more questions over here?
I just think it's interesting what you're saying, because I think many businesses are afraid to put their hand up in any open forum or consumer forum, especially the consumer-facing brands, for fear that they're not doing enough. What they're doing is perhaps not fully compliant in every way. It's new for so many people. Would it be helpful, and what you're talking about with data, would it be helpful if there was a more consumer-facing sort of overarching that people could sign up to, that sort of helped them to develop step by step, building up to the targets we all want to reach, that they could sign up to and feel more comfortable that they're part of something in a group that could start to develop them?
Yes, I think there's, how we engage people to come on this change, I think is critical, and I think there's lots of brilliant ideas out there already about how we engage people to come and do this with us. I think there's also, Microsoft, big believer in trying to unlock all of this potential that sit within us and innovate on what potentially hasn't been discovered yet. So how we can bring together all of the great minds to try and solve these, I think, is important. So it's about opening up the imagination, getting people engaged, and getting on the journey. But I absolutely agree around the transparency point, because we're all learning as we go, and I think if we're being open with the things that we're struggling with or where we've fallen down, or just being upfront about where our successes are, but some of our failures too, we can learn from each other and support that. So I think it's about being honest with everybody about what the path ahead looks like and how we can support each other to be better.
To add to that, I think there is a lot of information available, so I think it's more how to get access to it. And a lot of the industry bodies, one of the first people on the first panel talking about the British Retail Consortium, we're signed up to some of that work. UK GBC was mentioned as well. Let's Build Back Better. I mean, the whole range of industry collaborative bodies, NUEC obviously doing work. So there's a whole lot of industry bodies that I'd say are probably a good. So I'm conscious my mic keeps changing volume, but there's a whole lot of industry bodies that already exist that it's worth tapping into and talking to colleagues, peers in your sector initially. And people should be happy to share. It's really important. The transparency piece is really, really important. And the other thing is that brands that are scared about taking the first step, if there is something within any business that they're worried about being discovered for, chances are they will be, because actually one of the great things about living in a free society is that people can question the way you do things and can dig into your practices or your products or your ambitions and call you out on them. We've all seen plenty of big brands, some very famous ones that had facilities on the streets not far from here, who were called out for some behaviour that was not acceptable. They don't exist any longer. So I think the days of hiding or being able to hide things have long gone. So I think it's more collaborating, sharing, taking those first steps, because we're all going to need to work on this, because nothing's going to change if we don't start with taking action now.
Absolutely, and we all need to take that action together, don't we? We've probably got time for one last question, if there is one last one anywhere.
I think one should assume that offsets and negative emissions technologies are not likely to rise to the rescue. I'm very pleased that the JLA is producing these greenhouse gas inventories. I believe, though, they're about 2 or 3 years out of phase. We're in an emergency. We actually need them within 1 year lag, I would think. But it's very important that you pass that information down to the local authorities and they make it available to Joe Public. So, because I suspect that they are the best entity to coordinate the 10% reduction or something in greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1 and 2, and preferably scope 3 in Westminster, where I am. Would you say that the local authorities are the best forum for coordinating all this? Thank you.
Yeah, so absolutely. And yes, we are currently working to publish our 2019 data. So that's the pace at which we can work. So we take data from BEIS, from TfL, from other sources, the Environment Agency, but recognize that in an emergency, yes, ideally we'd be working with 2021 data, but it's just not possible with the pacing and getting it accurate as well. So on the local authorities, yes. So all of this information that I've run through is made available publicly once we've verified it and published it on that LEGI inventory. And that is available for businesses, for local councils. It's on london.gov now in our data store. And then we are constantly working with local authorities and then with organisations at the even more local level, so business improvement districts and community groups, to share the information that we have and to work with them. We definitely believe that working at the most local level is the best way to address these things. Sometimes regional, so working at the London level for certain policy areas is the best way to do it. But where we can, we will work as locally as possible. So we've got programs like our Future Neighbourhoods program, which works to create net zero neighbourhoods at the, I'm going to forget this, local middle super output area, which I think is about 9,000 homes. Have I got that?
That's not my understanding.
Yeah. So where we can, we want to work as locally as possible, and that involves the consumer choices that we've discussed a bit today. It involves housing, domestic buildings, non-domestic buildings, and making those changes there so that people are able to make the choices that they need to, and that businesses have the right information. I think we've spoken a lot, and I know NWET represents some big global companies, but a majority of London's businesses are small and micro. So enabling everyone to make those decisions, that happens at the most local level. So yes, we do work that way.
So today marks the launch of our new West End company Road to Zero Sustainability Action Plan. As businesses in the West End, we want to work together to give our impact and measure our journey along the way. Within our action plan that you've heard a little bit about today, we've got 3 core ambitions, and they are ambitions because they are ambitious, let's be honest, and we must work together on those. So our first one is to advocate and to support our members to get to net zero by 2040. We are using, as we said before, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is based on climate science, and we are including scopes 1, 2 and 3. Again, we don't have all the answers, but absolutely we need to work with the experts to ensure that we can get there along the way. How we will measure our primary success against that, our measurement tool, is actually the Sustainable City Charter, which is being developed by Westminster City Council and the Westminster Property Association. And it is our ambition that when that launches this year, we get as many of our members signed up to that as possible. Damien touched on this in the last session, but the Sustainable City Charter is around the built environment and making us a greener environment for everybody. Secondly is to seek a more sustainable district for retail, leisure and dining experience for everybody, for our residents, for our workers and for our visitors that come to enjoy the area. We do quarterly surveys, quarterly on-street surveys with everybody coming into the West End, and that is how we intend to measure our success in this area. And it's absolutely crucial that we do measure the sentiment of visitors coming to the West End. Are we hitting the dial? Do we need to do more? What do we need to do more in? And again, that's not just our consumers, but of course our residents and our workers as well. And lastly, but by no means least, we will work with our partners to deliver better than legal requirements in terms of air quality. Now, our real area of focus, and it has been for the last 12 months, is to establish a zero-emission transport zone in the West End. Now, that doesn't, we want it broader, but we mustn't forget the specific nuances of the West End and where the benefits can really lie of having something within maybe a smaller footprint than the wider Westminster or perhaps Pan-London area. Now, our full action plan, which covers all of the detail on all of the targets, is available on our website from today. On there, you'll also see what we are doing in terms of our own operations, that we will get to net zero by 2040, and we have our own procurement policy in place. As Jason and others have mentioned already, we have worked tirelessly over the last 12 to 24 months to ensure that all of our vehicles for our operations for security and cleansing are electric. We have one at the back, do please have a look. And of course, you'll see the loop of our vehicles outside in the foyer area. Also live from today is our member hub, and I cannot stress enough the importance of this hub. On this hub, there is all of the current legislation, resources, best practice, and any information that you might need on any of your sectors is on there. So please do look to the hub and look at it as your source of any information that you might need. So that just leaves me to thank all of our panellists for today for their insights and their knowledge on our subject matter, and all of you for coming. For New SN Company, this has genuinely been 2 years in the making that we've been on this journey, and we are delighted to be able to share our progress with you today and to be working with you over the next 5 years to deliver our goals. Thank you.